If you ever want to know the truth about your own life, don't ask your family. Open the page you swore you'd never read again. I'm Evelyn Carter, and I'm 74 years old, sitting at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee that's gone cold, because my hands won't stop shaking long enough to take a sip. The morning light coming through the blinds makes stripes across the wood like a quiet warning, and the house feels too big for one person, even though it's only about 1,200 square feet. I used to fill rooms with noise, holiday casseroles, birthday candles, the television turned up just a little too loud. Now the loudest thing in here is the refrigerator humming like it's trying to remind me I'm still alive. I didn't plan to do this today. I had a plan, the kind older people rely on. A simple list, a slow afternoon, a neat ending. I was going to sort one closet, donate a couple boxes, and pretend I'm a reasonable woman who simply downsized after retirement. But I opened the cedar chest at the foot of my bed, the one that still smells faintly like mothballs and old perfume, and I found the notebook. The diary, the one I kept years ago and then hid away like a bad habit. The cover is faded, the corners bent, the elastic strap stretched loose, as if even the book got tired of holding itself together. I told myself I kept it for memories. That's what people say when they can't admit they're keeping evidence. For decades, I had one rule: never read the entries from that year. Never. Not when I moved houses. Not when I lost friends. Not when I sat alone on Christmas and told myself the world was just busy. Because that year is when my family walked away from me, my own blood, my own people, like I was a street they didn't want to drive down anymore. My son, Michael, stopped calling. My daughter-in-law stopped answering. The grandkids grew taller in photographs I wasn't in. And I built a story that let me survive. I was misunderstood. I was unappreciated. I was the one who gave and gave. And they were the ones who took and then disappeared. That story was warm. It was familiar. It tucked me in at night and let me sleep. But today, holding this diary, I felt something else underneath that warmth. Something sharp, like a splinter you can ignore until you press on it. I flipped through the pages without meaning to, past grocery lists and little complaints, past the kind of ordinary details that make a life look harmless. And then I saw it. A page folded in half, creased hard, like someone had snapped it shut in a hurry. The date at the top made my stomach drop. I could hear my own voice from years ago, loud and certain, saying things I thought were for their own good. I could see Michael's face the day he stood in my doorway, keys in his hand, eyes tired, not angry, tired, and said, "Mom, we can't do this anymore." I remember the way I laughed like it was a misunderstanding. I remember how sure I was that he'd come back. He didn't. And now this page, this one page, waits like a verdict. I haven't read it yet. Not the whole thing. Just the first line, because my eyes landed there before I could stop them. And that first line didn't sound like a victim at all. It sounded like a person confessing. My thumb pressed the crease and the paper resisted, like it had been holding its breath for years. I told myself to stop. I told myself I was an old woman with a tender heart and no reason to reopen old wounds. But my hand did not listen, because there is a point in life where comfort becomes a lie you can no longer afford. The ink on that page looked darker than the others, heavier, as if my younger self had leaned on the pen with too much certainty. I read the first line again, slow enough to taste it. Today I did what had to be done, even if Michael never forgives me. My mouth went dry. I had forgotten that I ever wrote his name with anything other than pride. The next sentence came like a cold draft under a door. If I tell him the truth, he will choose her over me, and I will be alone. Alone. That word stared back at me as if it had been waiting its turn to win. I sat there at the kitchen table, the coffee mug in front of me, the sunlight still striping the wood, and I realized something I did not want to realize. I had been predicting my own ending, and then I had spent years acting like it was something that happened to me. My eyes dropped to my hands, spotted with age, veins raised like thin rivers, and I thought about how those hands once braided Michael's hair when he was little, how they packed his lunch in a brown paper bag, how they waved from the porch when he drove off to college. I remember telling myself I was a good mother because I did the visible things. But this page was about the invisible things, the choices that never show up in photographs. I kept reading, even though each line felt like lifting a stone that had been sitting on my chest. I called Diane today. I had written, Diane. I had not said that name out loud in years. Diane Harper was my sister, The kind of woman who treated gossip like a hobby and advice like a weapon. In my 40s, when I was still quick to judge and slow to listen, I used to call her when I wanted to feel right. The page went on. Diane says Amanda is not good for him. Too independent. Too secretive. Too eager to take him away. Amanda, my daughter-in-law. I swallowed hard, because even now, after all this time, my mind tried to defend me. Too independent. Too secretive. Those were the words. I used to make my fears sound like wisdom. I had not hated Amanda for being cruel or careless. I had hated her because Michael looked at her the way I used to believe he would always look at me. I hated that I was no longer the center of his world, and I dressed that hate up as concern. The diary entry kept going, neat and brutal in its honesty. I cannot compete with the life she offers. He smiles around her. He listens to her. He talks about moving farther away, maybe out of state. I will not let her take him. I froze. There it was. Not a misunderstanding. Not a mistake. A decision. I remembered that. Time like a flash of heat. The Sunday dinner, the mashed potatoes, the polite conversation that never quite warmed up, Michael mentioning a job opportunity 2 states over, Amanda touching his arm and smiling, and me laughing too loud and saying, "Oh, you would never leave your mother behind." I said it like a joke, but it was a leash. In the diary, my younger voice continued without mercy. So I did what I promised myself I would never do. I told him something that would change how he sees her. My heart pounded so loudly I could hear it in my ears. I looked toward the hallway, as if someone might walk in and stop me, but there was no one. That was the point. I read the next line, and my stomach tightened. I said I saw her talking to an old boyfriend at the grocery store. I said she looked nervous. I said she lied. I covered my mouth with my hand. The shame did not come in a single wave. It came in little punches, one after another, because I remembered the moment I chose those words. I remembered how I justified it, how I told myself I was protecting my son. But the diary did not call it protection. It called it fear. And then the last line on that folded page hit me harder than any raised voice ever could. If he leaves her, he will stay with me. If he stays with her, I will make sure he feels guilty every day. I sat back, breathing shallow, the paper trembling in my fingers. All those years I had told myself they abandoned me. But this page said something else entirely. It said I built the door. It said I pushed them through it. The diary slipped from my fingers and landed flat on the table with a soft thud, like it was done speaking. I stared at the page as if the words might rearrange themselves into something kinder, something that would let me keep the old story I had wrapped around my loneliness. But the ink stayed put. I could hear the refrigerator hum, the distant sound of a lawn mower somewhere down the street, the normal life of other people continuing as if mine had not just cracked open. My first instinct was to defend myself, even now, even 74 years old. I wanted to say I was scared. I wanted to say mother's worry. I wanted to say I did not know better. But the page did not describe worry. It described strategy. It described intent. And as I sat there, memory began to rise in me, not as a gentle slideshow, but as a series of moments I had edited for years, now playing back in their original, unflattering cut. I saw Michael at 32, standing in my doorway with a paper grocery bag in one hand and his car keys in the other. I saw Amanda behind him, holding their toddler on her hip, trying to keep her face polite, trying to keep the peace like a person balancing a plate too heavy for one hand. I remembered how I spoke to Amanda that day, sugar sweet, a smile so stiff it hurt my cheeks. I remembered asking her, in that careful tone, if she was tired, if she was eating enough, if she needed help, when what I meant was, "Are you strong enough to take him from me?" I remembered Michael saying, "Mom, you have to stop making things up," and the way my stomach dropped because he did not say it like a son scolding a mother. He said it like a man closing a chapter. In my recollection, I used to cut that line out. I used to skip it and jump straight to the part where he left, because it was easier to remember the pain than the reason. Now the reason was sitting right in front of me, written in my own handwriting. I picked the diary back up and turned the page, expecting more accusations, more ugly truth. What I found was worse in a quieter way. There was another entry a few days later, and it began with a sentence that sounded almost triumphant. He is questioning her now. I felt sick. I had once taken pride in that. He asked me again what I saw. The entry said. I told him the same story. I had to keep it consistent. Consistent. Like I was building a case, not raising a family. I could see it then, so clearly it made my eyes sting. I did not just tell a lie. I maintained it. I watered it. I fed it. I watched it grow into something that could split a marriage right down the middle. I had been so certain that if Michael doubted Amanda, he would come running back to me, grateful, relieved, maybe even apologetic for ever believing he could live without me. But that is not what happened. The diary moved forward a few pages, and my own words turned from confident to frantic. Amanda cried. I had written, Michael is not looking at me the same. The next line was underlined twice. He asked if I have ever lied to him. I swallowed hard, because I remembered my answer. I remembered sitting in my living room, the floral couch, the lace curtains, the framed photos like a courtroom audience, and I remember saying, never. I said it like a vow. I said it like a woman who still believed she could control the outcome if she sounded sincere enough. The diary entry continued. He said he wants space. Space. That was the first word of their departure. Not anger. Not shouting. Space. Amanda says they will not be coming for Sunday dinner. I had written. She is turning him against me. Turning him against me. Even then, even on the page, I refused to see the obvious. He was turning away from me because I gave him something he could not live with. Doubt planted where trust used to be. I flipped again, faster now, as if speed could outrun guilt. And then I saw something that made my breath catch. A date written weeks later. A short entry. Just a few lines. The handwriting looked shakier, like I had been crying or holding the pen too hard. Michael came by alone, it said. He asked me one last time to tell the truth. One last time. My throat tightened because I knew what I had done. I had doubled down. I had chosen my pride over my son. The next line was a single sentence that I had not remembered until this moment, and reading it felt like hearing my own voice from across a canyon. I told him if he walks out that door, he is not my son anymore. I stared at that sentence until the letters blurred. For years I told myself they walked away from me. But now I could see the moment I pushed, and the moment he finally let himself fall away. I could feel my face getting hot the way it used to when I knew I had gone too far, but refused to admit it. I sat there with the diary open like a wound, and I tried to remember what happened after that sentence, after my younger self. Wrote down the cruel little ultimatum as if it was a reasonable boundary instead of an emotional trap. The memory came back in pieces, because shame does that. It breaks things apart so you cannot see the full shape. I remembered Michael's shoulders sinking, not in defeat, but in clarity. I remembered him looking at the carpet instead of my eyes, like he had finally understood that no amount of explaining would reach me. He did not argue. He did not shout. He just nodded once, small and final, and said, I am sorry it has to be this way. I used to replay that line and tell myself it proved he was weak, that he chose comfort over family. Now I hear it differently. Now it sounds like a man apologizing to a storm for not being able to stop the rain. The diary pages after that were messy, angry. I flipped through them and saw the pattern I never wanted to admit. I wrote about Amanda like she was a villain in a story I was the hero of. She is controlling him, I wrote. She is isolating him. But then, in the next breath, I complained that they were not coming to dinner, that they did not invite me to birthday parties, that they stopped sharing details of their lives. I called it disrespect. I called it betrayal. What it really was consequence. There was one entry that made my stomach tighten because it read like a script I had performed for years. I will not call first, I wrote. He needs to learn. Learn. As if love was a lesson and I was the teacher. I remembered telling my friends at church, with a tight smile and a sigh, that Michael had become distant. I remembered the sympathetic looks, the clucking tongues, the gentle hands on my shoulder. I remember how good it felt to be seen as the abandoned mother. I had built my identity around it. I did not just lose my family, I gained a role. And roles are hard to give up, especially when they come with comfort. I turned another page and found an entry dated 6 months later. The handwriting was steadier again, which felt almost worse, like I had recovered my composure without ever correcting my behavior. Diane says I should send a message on Michael's birthday. Read. Not an apology, just a reminder that I am his mother. I closed my eyes. I could picture that message, because I have typed versions of it 100 times in my head. Something like, I hope you remember who loved you first. Something like, I will always be your mother no matter what you do. Words that sound loving on the surface, but carry a hook underneath. The diary confirmed it. I wrote, I hope you find your way back to family. I had noted, as if I deserved credit for not writing something harsher. I felt a bitter laugh rise in my throat and then die there. Find your way back. As if he was the one who got lost. I kept reading, and the years moved faster. Holidays marked in short, resentful lines. Thanksgiving alone. Christmas alone. Saw pictures online. They look happy. The word happy was scratched over once, as if I could erase it from their faces. And then, tucked between 2 pages, something fell out onto the table. A folded sheet of paper, yellowed at the edges, creased like it had been opened and closed many times. It was not my handwriting. It was Michael's. The sight of his script made my chest tighten because I had not seen it since he was in high school, leaving notes on the counter asking if we had milk or if he could borrow the car. This paper was thicker, more careful. A letter. The top line was dated, and the date was the year they stopped coming. I stared at it, suddenly afraid in a way I had not felt in a long time. Because a diary is your own voice. You can argue with it. You can excuse it. But a letter from the person you hurt is different. A letter does not care about your excuses. It tells you who you were from the outside. My fingers hovered over the fold, and I realized something that made my stomach drop. He did not just walk away. He tried to leave me a way back. I just never opened it. The paper felt lighter than it should have, like something that had been waiting so long it forgot how heavy it was supposed to be. I held it between both hands, careful, as if I might tear it just by breathing wrong. My eyes caught on Michael's handwriting immediately, the slant of his letters, the way he looped his lowercase g like a small promise. I stared at the date first, because dates are safer than sentences. It was written in the top right corner, the year everything fractured, the year I started telling people my son had been turned against me. I swallowed and unfolded the letter slowly, the crease opening with a dry whisper. For a second I expected anger. I expected a list of accusations, the kind of words people throw when they want to win. What I saw instead was my son trying not to break. Mom. It began, simple, direct, a word that used to make me feel powerful. I am writing this because when we talk, we both say things we cannot take back. My throat tightened, because that first sentence already told me something I had refused to accept. He had tried to solve this like an adult, while I had treated it like a battle. I kept reading, and the room around me seemed to fade, leaving only the scratch of his pen on the page, a voice I had missed more than I ever admitted. I love you. I always will, he wrote. But I cannot keep bringing my wife and my children into a place where they are questioned, criticized, or made to feel like they have to earn your approval. I felt my shoulders tense, the old reflex rising, the part of me that wanted to argue, questioned, criticized. I wanted to say I was only being honest. I wanted to say I was only concerned. But the letter did not give me space to hide behind my favorite disguises. You told me you saw Amanda with someone from her past, he continued. I asked Amanda, and she told me the truth. She was at the store with her cousin, the one you met at the baby shower. You smiled at him and asked him where he was from. My stomach dropped so hard it felt like the chair moved under me. I remembered that baby shower. I remembered the young man with kind eyes and a polite laugh. I remembered myself complimenting his tie. And now I was reading, in my son's handwriting, proof that I had not just lied. I had lied when the truth was standing right in front of me. Mom, I am not writing this to punish you, Michael wrote. I am writing it because I need you to understand what this has done. Amanda cries after we leave your house. She tries to be respectful, but she feels like she is always on trial. And I feel like I am always being asked to choose between my mother and the family I built. Choose. That word again. The same choice I had tried to force, as if love was a competition and I deserved first place forever. My eyes burned, but I refused to blink because blinking felt like weakness, and I had built my whole life on never looking weak. You told me if I walked out that door, I was not your son anymore, he wrote. I need you to know that I did not leave because I stopped loving you. I left because I could not keep letting you hurt the people I love, including me. The air left my lungs in a slow, quiet way. Hurt. I had told myself I never hurt anyone. I told myself words were just words. I told myself I was just speaking my mind. But here was my son saying it plain. I heard him. I flipped my eyes down the page, and my heart started beating faster, because I saw a paragraph that looked like a final offer, like a door cracked open just enough for me to step through if I had any humility left. If you can apologize to Amanda without excuses, he wrote. And if you can agree to treat her with respect, we can try again. We can start small. A phone call, a coffee, an afternoon at the park with the kids. But if you cannot, then I have to protect my home. Protect my home. Not punish my mother. Protect my home. I pressed the letter flat with my palm, as if I could press the truth back into the paper. And then I noticed something that made my chest tighten in a different way. The bottom of the page was smudged, like a thumbprint dragged through ink. He must have held it while his hands were damp, or maybe while he was wiping his face. The last line was shorter, written with less control, like he was running out of strength. Mom, I want you in my life, he wrote. But I cannot lose myself trying to keep you happy. I sat there, the letter open, the diary beside it, and the cruelest realization settled over me like evening. He had not disappeared without explanation. He had left me a map back. And for years, I had chosen not to read it because reading it would mean I could not pretend anymore. I sat with the letter open so long that the sunlight moved across the table and the stripes from the blinds slid off the page, as if the day itself was trying to look away. My coffee had gone completely cold, but I did not touch it. The truth was doing something to me that caffeine never could. It was waking up parts of my mind I had kept sedated for years. I thought about that line in Michael's letter, the one that said he did not want to lose himself trying to keep me happy, and I felt a strange mix of anger and grief. Anger, because a part of me still wanted to insist that I deserved devotion without conditions. Grief, because deep down I knew he was right. I had trained my family to manage my moods the way people manage a rattling shopping cart. Keep both hands on it. Move carefully. Hope it does not tip. I closed my eyes and remembered what I used to call love. I used to call it loyalty. I used to call it respect. I used to call it being close. But what I really demanded was control disguised as closeness. And control always collects interest. It does not matter if you pay it back with apologies later. The debt still grows while you pretend you do not owe anyone. My fingers slid to the edge of the diary again, because I needed to know what happened next. I needed to see the moment I chose pride over repair. The entries after the letter were not dramatic. They were ordinary, which made them worse. I put the letter in the cedar chest. I had written, I cannot reward this behavior. Reward. I looked at that word like it was a foreign language. Reward this behavior. As if my son's boundary was a tantrum. As if his attempt to protect his wife and children was something I could train out of him like a dog. I remembered myself. That week, calling Diane, letting her fill my head with outrage and righteousness. Diane would have said, if you apologize, you will look weak. And I listened, because weakness was the one thing I feared more than loneliness. Funny how that works. I spent my whole life trying to avoid looking weak, and I ended up alone, which is the weakest feeling I know. I turned to another entry dated a few weeks later. I ran into Mrs. Patterson at the grocery store. I had written. She asked about Michael. I told her they are busy. Busy. That was the word I used to cover the silence. Busy, as if distance was scheduling and not pain. Then came the next line. I posted photos from my garden on Facebook so people know I am doing fine. I stared at that sentence because I remembered those posts. Bright tulips, smiling selfies, captions about gratitude. The performance of thriving. Meanwhile, I was sitting on my couch at night staring at my phone, refreshing a screen that never lit up with his name. I had been starving and pretending I was full. The diary became a timeline of my stubbornness. Did not call. He should call. He did not call. He is making his choice. Every entry was a brick, and I kept stacking them until a wall existed where a relationship used to be. And the ugliest part was that I told myself I was doing it for dignity. But dignity is not refusing to apologize. Dignity is telling the truth even when it costs you. I did not do that. I wanted to be right more than I wanted to be close. I looked back at Michael's letter again, at the offer he made. Start small, a phone call, a coffee, an afternoon at the park. It was not even a demand for grand gestures. He was giving me a ramp, not a cliff. And I ignored it. I held the letter up to the light and noticed something I had not noticed before. Something that made my stomach tighten with a new kind of dread. In the bottom left corner, there was a faint stain shaped like a ring, the kind a cup of coffee leaves behind. That meant he had been sitting somewhere, writing this slowly, probably staring at the page, probably pausing between sentences like he was choosing each word with care. He had put time into me even while protecting himself from me. And I repaid that effort by folding his honesty into a box like it was junk mail. I wanted to blame Diane. I wanted to blame Amanda. I wanted to blame time. But the truth was simpler and uglier. I was the one who made apology feel like surrender. I was the one who turned reconciliation into a contest. And now, at 74, the contest was over and I was the only one still playing. My hands trembled again, but this time it was not fear of what the page would say. It was fear of what the page had already said and what it meant about the years I lost. I pictured my grandkids' faces, older now, maybe in middle school, maybe with voices that had changed, jokes I would not understand, memories that did not include me. I pictured Michael, older too, carrying my absence like something he learned to live with. And a thought hit me so hard I had to grip the edge of the table. What if the real punishment was not that they left, but that they healed without me? I stared at the phone on the counter, the one I rarely used for calls anymore, and I realized I had been waiting for the perfect moment to reach out, the moment when I could do it without admitting fault. That moment never comes. It is a fantasy for people who want forgiveness without humility. My eyes dropped back to the diary, and I saw another folded corner farther in, another page marked like a secret. I did not remember folding that one. That scared me even more than the letter did, because it meant there was still something I had buried even from myself. I reached for it, and my pulse jumped, because I suddenly understood. The diary had not just recorded what I did. It had recorded what I intended to do next. I slid my finger under the next folded corner and felt the paper lift like a secret being pried out of hiding. This fold was older, sharper, pressed so hard the page had a permanent scar across it. The date at the top made my throat tighten because it was written only 2 days after Michael's letter, back when I still had time to fix what I broke. I read the first line and my stomach turned. If he thinks he can threaten me with distance, I will show him what loss really feels like. I stared at that sentence, and for a second I did not recognize myself. Then the recognition came, and it was worse than surprise. I did not become cruel by accident. I became cruel by practice. My younger self kept writing with the calm confidence of someone convinced she was morally superior. Amanda wants respect, I had written. Fine. I will give her silence. Michael will learn that you cannot abandon your mother and still feel good about it. I could hear my own old voice in those words, that tone I used when I believed I was being strong. But strength does not need revenge to feel tall. Only insecurity does. My eyes moved down the page, and the next lines made my hands go cold. I will tell the family what happened, I wrote. I will let them know Michael has chosen his wife over his own mother. I will not lie. I will tell it the way it is. I let out a breath that sounded like a small laugh, except there was no humor in it, because I knew exactly what the way it is meant coming from me. It meant my edited version, my polished victim story, the one that turned my manipulation into concern and my lies into intuition. I kept reading. If the family knows, they will pressure him, I wrote. He hates disappointing people. He will come around. Pressure him. I pressed my palm against my chest as if I could physically hold back the rising sickness. I remembered it now, too clearly. The phone calls to relatives, the carefully chosen phrases, the soft sighs that sounded like heartbreak, but were really bait. I remembered how quickly the sympathy poured in, how easy it was to recruit people to my side when I framed myself as the abandoned mother. And I remembered the satisfaction I felt when someone said, "He should be ashamed." I had called that support. It was not support. It was a crowd. It was leverage. The diary entry continued with a sentence that made my eyes sting. I will post about it. Not directly, just enough so people ask. I looked at the page and saw the blueprint of my own social media pity parade. Those vague posts. Those quotes about betrayal. Those "pray for me" lines that never named names but made everyone lean in. I used to tell myself I was simply sharing my feelings. The diary revealed the truth. I was setting traps. I was fishing for public judgment to force private obedience. And then I read the next line and felt my mouth go dry. If he does not respond, I will return his childhood things. The trophies, the drawings, the box in the attic. He will understand what it means when a chapter is closed. Return his childhood things. I pictured the box I still had up there even now, the one with his Little League photos and his kindergarten handprints. I could not remember actually sending it, but I remembered thinking about it, imagining the sting it would cause, imagining him opening a package and feeling the weight of my rejection. And that was the moment I understood something that made me ashamed in a deeper way. I did not just want Michael back. I wanted him back in a posture. I wanted him back smaller. I wanted him back apologizing. I wanted him to crawl to prove he loved me enough. I stared at the paper until the letters blurred, and then I forced myself to keep going, because if I stopped now, I would give my younger self the mercy she never gave anyone else. The last paragraph on the folded page was short, written with hurried strokes, like I was excited by my own plan. I will wait 3 weeks, I wrote. Then I will send one message. Not an apology, a reminder. If he ignores it, I will know he has made his choice, and I will stop considering him. Stop considering him. As if my son was a job application. As if my love was something he could lose by missing a deadline. I felt my eyes burn, and a tear finally slipped down my cheek before I could stop it. I wiped it fast, almost angry at myself, because even now I had the instinct to hide emotion like it was weakness. But there was no one here to impress. No one here to convince. Just me, a diary, and the truth that I had spent years refusing to name. I set the page down and looked at Michael's letter again, and the contrast hurt. He offered a coffee and a park. I planned a campaign and a punishment. He wanted to keep his home safe. I wanted to keep my ego fed. And suddenly I understood why they did not come back after that. It was not because they were stubborn. It was because I made returning feel like walking into a courtroom where I was the judge. I picked up the diary again and flipped forward, my fingers moving without permission, because now I needed to know the exact moment my plan turned into permanent silence. Somewhere ahead, I knew, there would be an entry where I wrote the final justification that sealed my loneliness like a lid. I flipped forward through the diary faster than I meant to, the pages fluttering like nervous wings, because I could not stand the slow drip of my own choices anymore. Dates jumped by in uneven steps, and the handwriting changed with my moods, neat when I felt in control, jagged when I felt ignored. Then I found the entry that matched my promise on that folded page, the one where I planned to wait 3 weeks and then send a message that was not an apology. The date was circled, as if my younger self wanted to make sure the moment could not slip away. 3 weeks today, it began. I will send the text. I held my breath. I could almost see myself sitting with my phone, composing words that sounded innocent to strangers, but sharp to the person who knew me. The next line told me exactly what I wrote. I said, I hope you remember where you came from. I did not raise you to abandon family. I closed my eyes because I could hear the tone in it, the familiar sting wrapped in a moral lesson. I opened them and kept reading. He did not respond. 4 words. Simple. Final. The next sentence made my chest tighten. Amanda probably read it first. Even then, I blamed her, even when the silence was my son choosing peace over my performance. I turned the page and found another entry the next day. Still no response. I wrote, he is testing me. Testing me. I could not believe how much I needed to turn everything into a contest. A week later, another entry. I will not beg. Begging is for people who have done wrong. That line stung, because it showed me the logic that kept me trapped. I believed apology was only for the guilty, and I refused to see myself as guilty. The diary went on, and the silence grew legs and walked through my life. Saw a photo online of the kids at the pumpkin patch. They look happy without me. Diane says they will regret this one day. I remembered Diane feeding me those words like candy, sweet and empty, and I remembered how I swallowed them because regret sounded like justice. But regret is not justice. It is just time doing what it always does. I turned another page and found the moment that became my public story. Told Pastor Allen I am giving Michael space. I wrote, and then, in parentheses, so he learns respect. I laughed once, short and bitter, because I could see it now. I called it space so I could sound mature, but I meant punishment. I meant absence as a weapon. I meant love as leverage. And then I found the entry that made everything click into place, the entry that explained why the distance never softened with time. It was written months later, after holidays alone, after unanswered calls I pretended not to make. I heard from Aunt Carol that Michael told the family I lied. I wrote, he is making me look bad. I stared at that sentence, and my throat tightened because I remembered the panic. Not panic that I had hurt my son, panic that my image might crack. The next lines were underlined, like a vow. If they think I am the problem, I will stop trying. Let them live without me. I will focus on people who appreciate me. There it was. The final justification. The lid on the jar. I told myself I was choosing dignity, but what I chose was a life where I never had to face the consequences of my own behavior, because I could call everyone else ungrateful and walk away first. I set my hand on the page and felt my pulse under my fingertips, steady and stubborn, the same pulse that carried me through decades of being right. And in that quiet kitchen, with a cold cup of coffee and my son's letter open like a door I refused to walk through, I finally admitted the truth I spent years dodging. I did not just lose my family. I decided, one petty step at a time, that protecting my pride mattered more than protecting my relationships. And now the only person left to punish was me. The house felt different after that admission, like the walls had been listening all these years and finally stopped pretending. I sat very still, hands resting on the diary and Michael's letter as if they were two ends of the same rope, and I realized I had been waiting for a miracle that would let me keep my pride and still get my family back. No miracle came, only a choice. I stood up slowly and walked to the counter where my phone sat face down, the way I always left it, like I was afraid of what it might show me. I flipped it over and the screen lit up, bright and ordinary, and for a moment I almost laughed at how simple the next step was compared to the years of stubbornness I had poured into not taking it. I opened my contacts and scrolled until I saw his name, Michael Carter. My thumb hovered, and I felt the old fear rise, the fear of being ignored, the fear of hearing nothing and having that nothing confirm what I deserved. But then I thought about the letter, about how he offered a coffee and a park, and how I answered with silence and strategy. If I was going to do one thing differently before my life ended, it had to be this: tell the truth without asking for applause. I tapped his name and started a message, not the kind that hooks and guilt trips, not the kind that sounds holy while it stings, but plain, honest words that left me nowhere to hide. I wrote that I lied about Amanda and that I used other people to pressure him. I wrote that I was wrong, that I was sorry, and that he did not owe me forgiveness. I wrote that if he ever chose to speak to me again, I would treat his wife with respect and I would never ask him to choose between us again. My eyes blurred and I had to wipe them with the back of my hand, irritated at myself for crying so late in the game, but I kept going. I read the message twice, then a third time, because old habits wanted to polish it into something that protected my image. I refused. I hit send before I could edit my honesty into something safer. The moment it left my phone, my chest felt both heavier and lighter, like I had finally set down a bag I had carried so long I forgot it was mine. I did not know if he would respond. I did not know if I had waited too long. But I knew something else, something simple and brutal and freeing. For the first time in years, I was not asking my family to come back to a lie. I was offering them the only thing I should have offered from the beginning: the truth and a quieter version of me.